My name is Harper Quinn, and this is the story of how I sent a $2.5 million invoice that destroyed the man who tried to destroy me. The fluorescent lights in Orion Frameworks' Boston office hummed their familiar tune as I sat hunched over my keyboard, fingers dancing across the keys with practiced precision. At 34, I'd spent the better part of a decade building systems that kept companies alive, though you'd never know it from looking at my resume. No Ivy League pedigree, no prestigious internships, just pure, raw talent honed through countless nights of self-teaching and real-world problem-solving. They called me the ghost who saves systems around here. I rarely showed up to the trendy team-building exercises or Friday beer pours, but when production went down at 3 a.m., when the databases screamed in agony, when the load balancers gave up their ghost, I was the one they called. My code wasn't pretty. They said it wasn't elegant or modular or whatever buzzword the tech blogs were pushing that week, but it never failed, not once. That morning started like any other. I'd already fixed 2 critical bugs before most of the team had even grabbed their first artisanal latte. The notification for the legacy code review meeting popped up on my screen, and I sighed. Another waste of time, but attendance was mandatory according to our new CTO, Bryce Turner. Bryce. Even thinking his name made my jaw clench. He'd swooped in 3 months ago with his Stanford MBA and his collection of TED Talk catchphrases, promising to revolutionize our technical infrastructure and align our development velocity with market demands. The board ate it up. The younger developers worshipped him. Me. I saw right through the polished veneer to the hollow core beneath. The conference room was packed when I arrived, sliding into a seat near the back. Bryce stood at the front, his designer sneakers squeaking against the floor as he paced back and forth. Behind him, projected on the wall in devastating clarity, was my code. My Pulse Core library, specifically the heartbeat monitoring system that kept our entire back-end infrastructure running. Now, this, Bryce said, gesturing at the screen with theatrical disgust, is exactly what's holding us back. Look at this function. Just look at it. The room turned to stare at the offending code. I recognized it immediately. A particularly complex piece of logic that handled failover scenarios when our primary servers went down. It had saved the company from complete system failure at least a dozen times in the past year alone. This is what I call duct tape programming. Bryce continued, his voice dripping with condescension. No design patterns, no proper abstraction layers, just brute force solutions hammered together by someone who clearly never learned the fundamentals of software architecture. A few of the junior developers snickered. I felt heat rising in my cheeks, but kept my expression neutral. Let him talk. Let him show everyone exactly who he was. Harper, Bryce said suddenly, his eyes finding mine across the room. Since you wrote this masterpiece, perhaps you'd like to explain your thought process? Help us understand why you chose to ignore every principle of clean code? I stood slowly, taking my time. The room was silent except for the air conditioning's whisper. That function handles 17 different failure modes across our distributed system, I said, keeping my voice level. It's saved us from total system collapse 43 times in the last 6 months. The inelegant approach you're mocking has prevented approximately $8.2 million in lost revenue from downtime. Bryce's smile never wavered. And imagine how much better it could perform if it were properly architected. This is exactly the kind of technical debt that's strangling our growth potential. I sat back down without another word. There was no point arguing with someone who valued appearance over function, who thought complexity was a sin rather than sometimes a necessity. But as Bryce continued his presentation, tearing apart more of my code, something cold and calculating began to form in the back of my mind. Over the next few weeks, the signs became impossible to ignore. My access to certain repositories was quietly revoked. I was excluded from architecture meetings. New hires were brought in. Fresh-faced kids from top schools who spoke Bryce's language of microservices and containerization but couldn't debug their way out of a paper bag. Then I found the email. Not meant for me, of course, but accidentally included in a reply all chain. Phase out the legacy team members. It read, Quinn first. Her departure will send the right message about our new technical standards. I leaned back in my chair, staring at those words on my screen. So, that was how it would be. After everything I'd built, everything I'd saved, I was being marked for deletion like deprecated code. But Bryce had made a critical error. He'd focused so much on the appearance of my code that he'd never bothered to understand what it actually did, or more importantly, who actually owned it. You see, 3 years ago, during a particularly brutal crunch period, I'd open-sourced the core components of our monitoring system. Pulse Core, I'd called it. The company had been thrilled at the time, seeing it as great PR for our commitment to the open-source community. What they hadn't paid attention to were the licensing terms I'd carefully crafted with the help of a friend from law school. The license was perfectly legitimate and fairly standard for open-source projects. Free for personal use. Free for educational purposes. But commercial use required a paid license. And buried in subsection 3.2.4 was a particularly interesting clause about usage rights post-employment termination. I spent the next 2 weeks documenting everything. Every API call to PulseCore, every service that depended on it, every process that would grind to a halt without it. The evidence filled folders on my personal drives, encrypted and backed up in triplicate. The day arrived faster than expected. Tuesday morning, barely past 9 a.m. I received the meeting invite from HR. Organizational restructuring discussion, they called it. How corporate, how clean, how utterly predictable. The HR representative was new, hired just a week ago. She couldn't have been older than 25, with a practiced smile that never reached her eyes. Bryce sat beside her, feigning concern. "Harper," she began, sliding a folder across the table. "As you know, Orion Frameworks is evolving to meet the challenges of a competitive marketplace. Unfortunately, this evolution requires us to make some difficult decisions about team composition." I didn't touch the folder. "You're firing me." "We prefer to think of it as a mutual parting of ways," she said smoothly. "Your contributions have been valued, but we need engineers who align with our new technical vision." "Engineers who write elegant code," I said, glancing at Bryce. He had the decency to look slightly uncomfortable. "The decision has been made." The HR rep continued. "Your access will be revoked effective immediately. Security will escort you to collect your personal belongings." I stood, straightening my hoodie. "I assume you've reviewed all the intellectual property implications?" The HR rep's smile flickered. "I'm sorry?" "The systems I built, the code I wrote, you've verified the company's right to continue using all of it?" "All work produced during employment belongs to the company," she recited. "It's standard in your contract." "Of course," I said, heading for the door. "Just checking." Security was already waiting outside. An apologetic-looking guard named Marcus, who'd always been friendly during my late-night coding sessions. "Sorry about this, Harper," he muttered as we walked to my desk. I packed slowly, methodically. A few personal items, some notes, my favorite coffee mug with its faded "There are only 10 types of people" joke. My coworkers avoided eye contact, suddenly fascinated by their screens. Only Sarah, a back-end engineer who'd started the same week as me, dared to catch my eye. She looked stricken. "Don't worry about it," I said loud enough for others to hear. "I'm sure the new architecture will be much more elegant." As Marcus escorted me out, I pulled out my phone and sent a single text. "It's time." They just pulled the trigger. Clara Walsh responded within seconds. "On it. Don't do anything until I give the signal." Claire and I had met at a tech law seminar years ago. She specialized in intellectual property disputes in the software industry. And more importantly, she understood both the technical and legal sides of the equation. We'd stayed in touch. And when I told her about the PulseCore licensing, she'd laughed for 5 solid minutes. "You beautiful, paranoid genius," she'd said. "This is either going to be nothing, or it's going to be spectacular." Spectacular it would be. Back home, I set up my monitoring station. 3 screens, VPN connections, and most importantly, read-only access to PulseCore's public repository statistics. You see, while Orion had revoked my internal access, they couldn't stop me from seeing who was pulling from the public repo. And pull they did, constantly, automatically, desperately. Every build, every deployment, every automated process reached out to grab the latest version of Pulse Core. The library was so deeply embedded in their infrastructure that removing it would be like trying to remove your skeleton while keeping the body intact. I watched and waited. Clara needed time to prepare the legal framework to ensure every T was crossed and every I dotted. In the meantime, I observed Orion's slow descent into chaos. It started small. A spike in error rates here, a slowdown there. The new engineers Bryce had hired were brilliant in theory, but lost when confronted with the messy reality of production systems. They tried to patch things, to refactor on the fly, but without understanding the underlying architecture, they were just making things worse. Sarah kept me updated through careful, encrypted messages. "It's a disaster," she wrote. "Bryce is in full damage control mode. He's been sleeping in the office, trying to figure out why everything's falling apart." Week 2, post-termination, was when things got interesting. A major client complained about performance degradation, then another. The sales team was in panic mode. The board started asking questions. And still, every hour, on the hour, Orion Systems reached out to pull Pulse Core updates. Each request carefully logged, time-stamped, and preserved. Clara called on a Thursday evening. "We're ready. You sure you want to do this?" I looked at my screens, at the evidence of years of work being twisted and perverted by someone who didn't understand its value. "Send it." The invoice was a thing of beauty. Clara had crafted it with the precision of a surgeon and the devastating force of a sledgehammer. $2.5 million for unauthorized commercial use of Pulse Core. Every violation itemized, every breach documented. Every continued use after my termination highlighted in excruciating detail. But the invoice was just the opening salvo. The real weapon was the cease and desist order that accompanied it. Effective immediately. Orion Frameworks was to stop all use of Pulse Core or face public disclosure of their intellectual property violations. Clara had timed the delivery perfectly. 4:47 p.m. on a Friday. Late enough that the legal team would see it but not have time to fully respond. Early enough that Bryce would have to sweat it out all weekend. My phone started buzzing within an hour. Unknown numbers, blocked calls, text messages from former colleagues. I ignored them all. This wasn't about revenge, not really. It was about respect, about the value of the work that keeps companies running, even if it's not wrapped in the latest architectural trends. Sarah's message came through at 11 p.m. Emergency board meeting called. Bryce looks like he's seen a ghost. Legal is freaking out. I slept better that night than I had in months. Monday morning brought clarity to Orion Frameworks, though not the kind they wanted. Their legal team had worked through the weekend, and their conclusion was unanimous. I had them dead to rights. The Pulse Core license was airtight, their violations were clear, and their continued use after my termination was particularly damaging. But the real blow came when they tried to remove Pulse Core from their systems. The new team, for all their talk of proper architecture and clean code, couldn't untangle it. Pulse Core wasn't just a library, it was the nervous system of their entire operation. Every service spoke its language, every process danced to its rhythm. Bryce, according to Sarah, had spent 48 hours straight trying to build a replacement. He'd failed spectacularly. The elegant solutions he championed crumbled under real-world pressure. The modular architecture he preached couldn't handle the edge cases my Inelegant code had been managing for years. Tuesday brought the lawyers. Wednesday brought the settlement negotiations. By Thursday, the wire transfer hit my account, $2.5 million, plus an additional $500,000 in interest and damages. But money wasn't the only term. Orion Frameworks was required to issue a formal statement acknowledging their use of Pulse Core and its critical importance to their infrastructure. They had to credit me as its creator and pay for a proper commercial license going forward. The statement went live on their website Friday morning. By noon, my inbox was flooded with messages from other companies, other CTOs, other engineers who suddenly understood the value of the ghosts who kept their systems running. Bryce's resignation was announced the following Monday. No fanfare, no goodbye party, just a terse notice about pursuing other opportunities. The board had realized, too late, that prioritizing appearance over function was a luxury they couldn't afford. Sarah told me they offered her my old position. She turned it down. As for me, I took a month off, then started my own consultancy. Turns out, there's a massive market for engineers who write inelegant code that actually works. My first client? A competitor of Orion Frameworks who'd been watching the drama unfold with great interest. I named the company Ghost Protocol Solutions. Our motto? Beautiful code is nice, working code is essential. The industry took notice. Articles were written about the Pulse Core incident, as it came to be known. Law schools added it to their IP curriculum. Engineering forums debated the ethics and implications endlessly. But for me, sitting in my new office, building systems for clients who valued function over form, the lesson was simpler. Respect the code that works. Respect the people who write it, and never, ever underestimate the ghost in the machine. Because sometimes, that ghost has very good lawyers. 6 months later, I received an unexpected email. It was from Marcus, the security guard who'd escorted me out. He'd left Orion and started his own cybersecurity firm. I watched what you did, he wrote. It was beautiful. Not elegant, maybe, but beautiful. I smiled and went back to my code. There were systems to build, problems to solve, and somewhere out there, another CTO was probably giving a presentation about technical debt and legacy code. Good luck to them. They're going to need it. The tech world is small, and word travels fast. Other engineers who'd been pushed out, marginalized, or dismissed for writing ugly code that worked started reaching out. We formed a loose network, sharing experiences and opportunities. The Inelegant Alliance, someone jokingly called it, and the name stuck. Major tech conferences started inviting me to speak. The hidden cost of elegant code became one of the most watched technical talks of the year. I stood on stages where Bryce had once preached his gospel of clean architecture and told the truth, that real-world systems are messy, complex, and held together by code that prioritizes function over form. When engineers approached me after these talks, relieved to hear someone validate their experiences. My manager keeps telling me to refactor everything, they'd say, but it works perfectly as is. Then document why it works. I'd tell them, and maybe look into open-source licensing. The ripple effects continued. Companies started reevaluating how they treated their legacy engineers. Smart CTOs began to understand that the person who'd been keeping the lights on for years might be worth more than a team of architects who'd never dealt with a production crisis. But I wasn't interested in becoming a guru or a thought leader. I had code to write, systems to build. My consultancy grew, but I kept it small, focused. We took on the impossible projects, the ones where elegant solutions had failed and someone needed code that just worked. One day, about a year after the incident, I was debugging a particularly nasty distributed systems problem when my phone buzzed. Unknown number. But something made me answer. Harper? The voice was familiar but different. Tired, humble. It's Bryce. I leaned back in my chair. Bryce? I wanted to apologize. The words hung in the air. I could have been cruel, could have twisted the knife. Instead, I just listened. I was wrong, he continued. About your code, about what matters in engineering. I've spent the last year trying to build what you built, and I can't. It's not about elegance or patterns or any of that. It's about understanding the problem deeply enough to solve it, even if the solution isn't pretty. What do you want, Bryce? I'm starting over. Small company, real problems. I was wondering if you'd be willing to consult, not on code, on thinking, on how to value what actually matters. I thought about it for a long moment. Send me the details, no promises. After we hung up, I stared at my screen, at the complex, inelegant code that was solving another impossible problem. Maybe people could change. maybe the industry could evolve. Maybe the next generation of engineers wouldn't have to choose between writing beautiful code and writing code that worked. Or maybe not. Either way, I had work to do. Real work. The kind that keeps the digital world spinning, one inelegant solution at a time. The cursor blinked on my screen, waiting. I cracked my knuckles and got back to it. Somewhere out there, a system was failing, a company was struggling, and they needed someone who could fix it. They needed a ghost. Good thing I knew where to find one. As I typed, I thought about all the engineers out there, sitting in meetings, being told their code wasn't good enough, being marginalized for prioritizing function over form, being pushed out by people who'd never stayed up all night fighting to keep a system alive. This story wasn't just mine. It belonged to all of us. The ghosts in the machines, the ones who wrote the code that actually worked. We might not win style points, but when everything went dark, we were the ones they called. And now, finally, we were the ones sending the invoices. The Pulse Core library still runs in thousands of systems worldwide. Its code isn't elegant, it's not modular or beautiful or aligned with the latest architectural trends, but it works. It saves companies from disaster every single day. That's the thing about ghosts. You might not see us, might not appreciate us, might even try to exorcise us. But we're the ones keeping your digital house from falling down. And if you're smart, you'll start treating us with the respect we've earned. Because the next time someone mocks your inelegant code, remember this. Somewhere in Boston, a ghost sent a $2.5 million invoice that changed everything. And there are a lot more ghosts out there, watching, waiting, and writing code that works. The revolution isn't coming. It's already here, running in production, keeping your services alive, one inelegant function at a time.